So a lot of this was just kind of looking in the mirror and being like, what is my desire for more money? Am I using it as a tool to make my life better and my wife and kids' lives better? Or it's just a measuring stick of how well am I doing in life and where do I sit on the social hierarchy? Look how successful I am. Using it more inward to just be like, I just want to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today. That to me was always the ultimate goal. If you have a fake Louis Vuitton purse, does that make you feel, what should make you happy is the quality of the purse. Happiness over the course of your life is shaped like a U. That people tend to be pretty happy in their 20s, and then it declines, and it troughs in about your 40s and 50s, which is the most unhappy period of your life, and then it climbs. And so people in their 70s tend to be fairly happy as well. When I was like 17, I was like, I think my purpose on this world is to work and support a family. I just felt that like in my caveman soul at the time. But the older you get, the more that you realize, and the more like very wealthy people who you come across and meet who are not nearly as happy as you thought because they're in poor health and their family situation is not what it is a big thing. I was asked the other day for like advice for graduating college students. And one of the things that I thought about was be very careful who you admire, because it's often the case that the person who you admire for their success or their wealth made sacrifices that you are unwilling to do. They made sacrifice, and the reason they're so wealthy and successful is because their entire life has been a singular focus on work, and it came at the expense of everything else at home and in their physical health and whatnot. And a lot of those people are not happy because they turn 40 or 50 and they realize it. And so it's very easy for people who have some level of financial success and independence to say, it doesn't matter, focus on your family. But it is so common for parents to just be like, my purpose is to provide right now, and that's what I want to do. I think I've struggled with that a little bit myself. I won't pretend that I'm any kind of expert in this topic, because every cell in my body since I've been 17 has said, your purpose is to work and strive and provide. But now, of course, when I'm traveling for work, I just miss my kids. I just want to hang out with them. Like, how do I square that away? I'm not quite sure what to do with it from there. But I also think no parent should feel guilty about sacrificing tremendously for the betterment of their family. And work and money is a huge part of that. And so I think that on the stratification of people in their 40s right now, I see a lot of people who had really good social lives in their 20s. They partied hard. They were always going on road trips with their friends. And for someone like myself in my 20s, who I did nothing but worked, basically, I was envious and jealous of them at the time, because they not only looked like they were having a much better life than I was at the time, but every single one of those people who lived large in their 20s is now 42 and not where they ever expected to be. And I don't think they would admit this because it's too hard to admit, but I think they regret what they did. And so I don't think there's any solid takeaway other than the boring answer of the balance that you need in life. If you look at like the two extreme ends of financial planning, you have like the YOLO mentality on one end and the FIRE mentality at the other. Like, one is live for today, and the other is just like the entire purpose of life is to save for tomorrow. Either end of that spectrum has a higher chance of leading to regret, where at some point in the future, you're going to look back and be like, I was too extreme. I wasn't balanced enough. And so I think I read this in a tweet this morning. I can't take credit for this, but like a really important life skill is learning the consequences of let me make sure I get this right, because it was a really good one. I'm going to pull this up for you. The best math you can learn is how to calculate the future cost of current decisions. Really, really good line. I love that. And I think a lot of people that had extreme financial plans on either end of the spectrum failed at that math. They didn't understand the cost that they would pay in the future for the decisions that they made at that period of time. You should never feel guilty about working hard to provide for your family.
Right.
The definition of you have provided there is probably much, much lower than you think. And at a certain point, what your kids want is not a bigger house or a new pair of Nikes. What they want is your attention and your empathy. And like, they don't And so that's a difficult balance for a lot of people in their 40s when they're probably at or near the peak of their earnings potential and whatnot. And so the incentive to be like, hey, if you work an extra 20 hours a week, you can really knock it out of the park this year is there, and it's easy to grab. And maybe in most situations, you should grab that. I think in those situations I do. But balanced with like, your kids are already probably taken care of to some standard that is fulfilling the vast majority of their material needs. And what they really want right now is you. I think one big theory that I'm reminded of here is the basic idea that I think we did a lot of harm to society. We as a whole society over the last 30 years or so, when we basically, not explicitly, but we basically told every young person that they can be in the top 10% or even the top 5%. Because what is the expectation of almost everyone in their teens and 20s these days? It's that you're going to go to college and get a bachelor's degree and graduate into a job that pays maybe low six figures with health insurance and a 401k that gives you a good work-life balance, that gives you fulfillment, and that allows you to buy a nice 3-bedroom house and 2 cars and take a summer vacation. What I just described there is a top 5% outcome, right? But we told 100% of young people that that's what they should expect. And so inevitably, when 100% of people think that they belong in the top 5%, this is basic math, 95% of them are going to be really disappointed. And I think part of that is in the 1970s, I think if your children were C students who were a mediocre player on the Little League team and who ground their way through high school and then went to work in a GM factory, great outcome, phenomenal outcome. You did great. There's no issue with that. And 100 years before that, if half of your children survived like scarlet fever and then went on to become farmers, great outcome, amazing outcome. And today, I don't think it's an exaggeration. That's like my children, not mine specifically, but the general vibe is like my children need to graduate near the top end of their high school, go on to a top 10% college, graduate into a 6-figure job that has a high level of income and prestige. And so everybody wants what is now basically a top 1% outcome. And so in that world, the Little League it's not for the child's enrichment. It's for the parent to fulfill like, hey, little Jimmy, you need to go on to achieve these huge dreams. You need to be a top 1% student or else I'm going to feel like a failure as a parent. And so there's been some really good books written on this recently where a lot of the pressure that is placed on modern teenagers to get ahead and get into a good college specifically is not for the kids' enrichment or benefit. It's for the parents just to make themselves feel good that they are a good parent. And everything got hyper competitive. A lot of that hyper competitive is just because the world is so much more connected now. So it used to be that in the pre-internet days, if you were a mediocre attorney or a mediocre CPA in your town, you had a great business because you had the capture of everyone in your town who had to go to you. Because even if you sucked, you were the only CPA in town. And now, look, my CPA lives in Texas. I live in Seattle. I'm talking to an estate attorney who doesn't live anywhere near me. So when everything got, everything just got flattened out in the sense of there's no more room for mediocre anybody's anymore. Nobody wants to read mediocre writing or listen to mediocre music in the way that they would have 100 years ago. And so your competition just went from your neighborhood to the entire world. And of course, AI is just going to dump kerosene on that fire. It's going to get 1,000,000 times worse with that. So I think those two things combined massively increases the expectations that you have for your children and the competition that your children are competing with in a way that makes parenting way more high stress, high pressure than it was in previous generations. Something that's almost formulaic to get in this. It's like, what's going to make me happy is not what's going to make you happy. And so the idea, I think most people spend money on things that society tells them that they should like, that marketing tells them that they should like, which is cars, homes, clothes, and the fancier, the more expensive, the better. That's like the basic model that we're taught. And I think the truth is everybody has very different likes and wants. And price is not always a good indication of how much value that you're going to get out of it. I think the people who've done the best job spending are people who completely tuned out any kind of social influence or what other people thought of their spending and just said, I'm going to go do my own thing. And within that, you're going to find people, if we're looking at a wealthy person who spends way more on this item than you would think they would, and way less on other items than on other items than you would think they would. Ramit Sethi is a perfect example of this. And he's kind of, I think he personifies what I'm talking about, where his thing is he loves clothes. And so he spends a lot on clothes and he dresses incredibly well. And that's so important to him. He's not a car guy. And so I hope I'm getting this right, but I think he drives a Honda Accord. And he's just like, I couldn't care less. I couldn't care less about cars or what anyone thinks about it, but he's going to be dressed to the nines everywhere he goes. That's his thing. Even if you are the exact opposite, it doesn't matter what your thing is. What I love is he's like, that's what makes me happy. It's the opposite of frugality. It's, I love clothes, so I'm going to mercilessly cut everything else in order to have a higher budget for clothes. And encouraging everyone to do that, to figure out what their thing is. My wife and I figured this out in the last 6 months, at least at this phase in our life with 2 young kids. Travel's not for us. It's just, it's like, we realized that after the last 4 vacations we took, the best part of the trip was coming home. And after having that feeling for the 4th time, we're like, can we just admit, maybe we should do less of this right now? Right. Maybe in 5 years when our kids are a little bit more stable, it'll be different. But for other people, they're they're vagabonds. They can't wait to travel. Good. Figure out what your thing is and what your thing is not, and go for it from there. When I travel for work a lot, I travel very well and spend a lot on travel that other people would find wasteful. But I love it. And so you have to figure out what your thing is and work from there. And I think most bad financial decisions and most bad financial behavior comes not from making bad decisions. It's when you're trying to follow somebody else's path and be like, well, that worked for them. Maybe I should do that. And so people listening to this might be like, oh, maybe I should try Ramit's thing. Maybe I should go spend a lot of money on clothes and drive a Beat Up Honda Civic. No, maybe that's for you, but it's probably not. You have to figure out what it is. It takes just a crazy amount of independence and looking in the mirror and trying to figure out what works for you. And same for investing. And so what's interesting to me, maybe it's not surprising, but it was interesting, is that at the end of my first book, The Psychology of Money, there's a chapter about the psychology of my money. I just kind of laid out everything that I believe. There's no numbers in it, but it's like, here's how I save, here's how I invest, here's how I spend, here's my personal philosophies. And in that, I said, look, I dollar cost averaged into index funds. I had a 3% mortgage that I paid off early, which is a terrible financial decision, but I love doing it because it made me feel good. And so I laid it out. And there are so many people who, I can't tell you how many emails I got of people saying, I love the book until I got to that chapter and now I can't take you seriously anymore. Even after laying out in the book, being like, look, there's no formula. You just have to figure it out for yourself. People looked at the decisions that I made and said, well, they basically said to themselves, I would have done it differently, so therefore you must be wrong. And I think that's the disconnect that people have.